And welcome to Storytime with Kiri Kennedy. I'm your host, adult Kiri Kennedy, also known as Kirsten Kennedy, and today I'm going to share with you an epic story written in the 5th grade. Just stunning historical fiction. And really, without further ado, let's just get right into it. It is pretty lengthy, I must say. So this, ladies and gentlemen, Cosette, The Story of a Little Yankee, by Kirsten Kennedy. That's right. It's 5th grade. Kind of becoming more mature. Definitely going to use my given name. It's important I show the title page. I believe this is a print shop masterpiece. Cosette, The Story of a Little Yankee by Kirsten Kennedy. There are some illustrations included, which I will show you when we get to them, but it is very wordy. Luckily it's typed, so it's a little easier for me to read. But yeah, let's see what happens. Cosette's a very interesting name for a little Yankee. I wonder where I got that name from. Chapter 1. A Visit from Abe. Boom! A cannon went off, and so did I. As soon as I heard that, I knew the war had started. The trumpet blew, and charge! I'm Cosette Salzburg, and I'm standing in the middle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania during the battle. There goes my dad off to the war, and my brother, and even my mom. I'm just 10. What am I supposed to do, stand here or something? I begin to walk home, and I shivered as I dodged the remains of my friends, family, even my school teacher. I was relieved when I reached my doorstep. I slowly opened the door. It creaked, and I trembled. Suddenly I heard laughter. I jerked around and saw a Confederate soldier pointing a gun at me. I held my breath. "Hi." I smiled as I talked. I was nervous, but I tried to be friendly. Then maybe he would take his pistol and leave, but I had no such luck. My hands were wiggling in my pocket. Then I felt the trigger of my father's revolver. I pulled it out of my pocket. Bang! He lay dead on the muddy grass. I ran in the house, locked the door, and took a cookie out of the cupboard. It was the only thing that could calm me down. I have so many questions right now. Shouldn't her father have his gun if he's currently fighting the battle? And if she's in the house, how did the soldier lay dead on the grass? I'll leave that for you all to sort out. I sat in a hard wooden chair that was my brother's. He always sat in it. I lay my head back and began to dream of a place where there were no wars. My family and I lived in a great big house where the scent of cookies would creep into my room, which had a great big canopy bed. My dreaming was interrupted by a knock on the door, and I slowly opened it. I was still half asleep. A blurred man who appeared to be Abraham Lincoln was standing there. "Yes," I mumbled. "What do you want?" "Are you Cosette Salzburg?" I dizzily nodded. "May I come in?" I hit my head to make sure I wasn't dreaming. It was Abraham Lincoln. I was totally flabbergasted. "Okay," I said, looking up at his tall figure. "Any time." I noticed he looked much taller than people said. He was 6 feet. Wow. "Now, Cosette," he started, "do you know how to nurse men?" I hesitated. "Yes, sort of." "Good," he replied. With that, he rolled up his pants and blood dribbled down his leg. I set to work right away. "Why did you come here, and how did you know my name?" "It was the nearest house, and I met your father on the way." "Oh," I murmured. "Was he okay?" Abe looked down at the floor. "They were carrying him to the hospital." I nodded to let him know I was okay. "Are you hungry?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Well, what do you have?" he asked eagerly. Before I knew it, we were eating my home-cooked meal, including beets, pork chops, and my famous apple pie. Very good, Cosette. You should cook for me. I blushed and giggled. And now, here's the beautiful illustration of Cosette and Abraham Lincoln enjoying their meal. Chapter 2. It all began when... In the morning, we got up at 6 o'clock to get an early start. I wanted to see my dad, and, well, it ended up I cannot nurse men. So I had to get Abe, or nicknames now, to the hospital. Good morning, Mr. President, I said cheerfully in the morning. Are you feeling better? He heavily shook his head. Trying to be nice, I said, don't worry, we're going to get you to the hospital today. In a feeble voice, he moaned, How can I ever repay you for being so nice? Just for a moment, a picture of my dream house ran through my head. No, I thought to myself, I'm not going to ask him for that. Don't worry, I don't need a thing, I stuttered. Studdered. He made a motion as if to say, I've got to get her something. What kind of emotion is that? When we walked to the hospital, I put his arm around my shoulder to support him. Are you sure I can't repay you? Again, he tried to persuade me into taking something from him. I nodded. I'm sure. If there is, I'll tell you, I promise. Abe said nothing, and we walked on. At last, I cried, throwing my arms up. We're here! The wonderful hospital! Can you imagine that? I looked at Abe, who was not listening to me at all. He was staring into space. I ignored his staring into space, and I climbed the steep stairs to reach the hospital. I opened the door and entered the lobby. People almost dropped dead when little, dirty, scruffy me walked in with the president. They began to whisper things like, Look at that little brat with the president, and I bet he doesn't know the pig's carrying him. Okay. I tried my best to ignore them, but it was totally impossible, so I stuck out my tongue at them and said, Pigs! That made them whisper even more. This time I ignored them. After Abe was all tucked into his cozy bed and all checked in, I ran to the front desk to check on my dad. Pardon me, I said sweetly, my eyelids fluttering. Can you tell me where I can find John Salzburg? He scanned the hospital check-in book and said, with rage in his voice, 211! Now beat it! He shooed me away like I was a fly. I ran down the hall and stopped when I passed a big poster with 2 children, a boy and a girl. The girl was handing him a big piece of chocolate. In fancy letters across the top, it read, This kiss is for you. Boy, what I'd do for some chocolate right now. I mean, maybe Hershey's was around? Did they have kisses during the Civil War? I don't think this is historically accurate at all. So I walked on 209, 210, 211. I was pleased when I saw the room number. I slowly opened the door to find not Dad, but an old man. I don't know why I said woman. Not Dad, but an old man who seemed in great pain. Louisa, he uttered in a weak voice. Now I am dying, and I trust you more than anyone, so take this. He handed me a white piece of paper. Give this to Grant, and say it's from Louis D'Angelo. I gently took the paper from him. Promise when I die, Grant will have this letter. Louis shuddered. Yes, I promise, I said curiously. Good, he said. Louisa, I love you. I do. Then he suddenly passed out. I had no idea if he was dead or not. If he was, I felt sad. He thought I was Louisa, and what would happen when the real Louisa came and he was dead? I knew one thing for sure. Watch out, Mr. Grant. Here I come. I ran out the door and out of the hospital, forgetting about both my dad and Abe Lincoln. Here we go. Another award-winning illustration. So there's Louis and Cosette. Chapter 3. The journey begins. I began to sweat, and I sat down. I had no idea where I was going. I could hear my tummy growling, and I could see my arm bleeding from a thorn bush. To make matters worse, I didn't even know where Grant was. From a distance, I could hear feet shuffling and a loud trumpet blowing. I stood up. The noise was coming from the north. I began to walk to the north, but I couldn't. I sat myself down and took out the letter Lewis had given me. I had no business reading it, but I was a snoop. It was in very sloppy handwriting. Dear Ulysses, as you know, I am dying in Washington Hospital. I would like you to know if you're doing okay. My dearest Louisa is giving this letter to you. Remember her golden locks of hair and her bright green eyes. Boy, is she skinny. If I die before she gets back, you can have her. I trust you. Yours truly, Louis D'Angelo. I'm pretty sure that D'Angelo came from the sandwich chain up in New England, D'Angelo Subs. Yeah. So yes, I looked at myself. Sure, I had golden locks, but I didn't have green eyes, and I'm certainly not skinny. Well, by the time I got there, I would be. Being Grant's daughter, how revolting. It doesn't sound like it's his daughter, like you can have her. Like I was in 5th grade. Okay. I cleared my mind of all these things. I looked up at the sky and lay my head back. Very slowly, my eyes shut. Soon, I was sound asleep. I was awoken by a wagon which had stopped right near me. I rolled over when I heard a horrid sound. A man with a dark gray shirt found me. Are you okay? He asked. I shivered. I knew he was a Confederate. Trying my best to talk Southern, I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." "Well, be off then. Go," he said. I began to run, but I tripped and the letter fell out of my pocket. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ulysses Grant on the paper. "What do we got here?" he said in a sly voice. I darted to get the letter, but it was too late. His foot had gotten there first. He quickly scooped it up. After he read it, he shouted, "Are you Louisa? I know you are. You're a dang Yank spy." I could feel my insides burst. Ouch. "I am not. For your information, I'm only 10. Now what 10-year-old would be a spy?" "You!" he shrieked and swept me off my feet. He tied me up and tossed me in the wagon. As the wagon headed for Gettysburg, I guess he was like, "Go to Gettysburg, wagon." I thought of my dad and how angry he would be if he found out I was associated with a Confederate. I mean, it's not like she had a... "Oh! You!" he shrieked. She's all tied up. Look at that. At least it's a nice sunny day. Chapter 4. Finally! The wagon moved violently with speed as we approached the Confederate campsite. I struggled around and tried to get out of the old, worn rope. It was no use. Only the strong man at the circus could get out of this. I slid my hand in my pocket and felt a trigger. "Daddy's revolver!" I cried. Luckily, the soldier didn't hear me. I squirmed around and finally got the revolver out of my pocket. This time, I dared not to shoot him because he had a knife next to him and I just supposed he got a flesh wound. What? This time I dared not to shoot him because he had a knife next to him and just suppose he'd got... I guess it's, if I'd only wounded, or she'd only wounded him, he would stab her. Anyway, I shot the gun in the air. He stopped the wagon quickly, and I looked around. "Hello?" I tried my best to talk like a man. Stop the wagon and stepped out. Any wrong moves and we'll shoot ya." I stopped. Too corny, I thought, but I continued. "We're hiding in these here parts." I let out a little giggle when his face began to turn white. I reached my hand up and grabbed the knife. While he was searching for the man, I was busy as a bee cutting the ropes. Free at last. I began to put on my act again as soon as I was out of the wagon. "Go on, go back home. We all here thought you were a Yank. Be off." Without looking in the wagon, he drove off. I was pleased at my success at acting. I thought to myself, I should be an actress when I grow up. Then there's the little, passage of time, asterisk-y thing. After 5 days of traveling, I was half dead. I was lucky that on the way I passed 2 strawberry patches, 3 apple orchards, and 1 farm. Gettysburg looked so different than it did a few days ago. I knew why. Not so many people had been killed. I reached in my pocket full of red, ripe strawberries. I took one out to eat. Yummy. My eye caught a glimpse of a tall figure that ran into a shack. Sneaky me followed him to the shack. On the door it read, Grant. Doesn't seem like that's too smart. Be like, here's the Union head guy right there. I started jumping up and down. I had found him. I reached in my pocket. Ah! I was mortified. The letter was gone. I felt like pulling my hair out. I ran back to trees, patches, and a farm. No letter. Then it hit me. When I picked strawberries, it fell out of my pocket. But that was the first thing I passed. I was not going back. Didn't the Confederate soldier take the letter? Just saying. I thought he did. That's when I found an eagle feather on the ground. A pen, I thought, picking it up. I felt smushed berries in my pocket, not a wonderful kind of ink, but I'll try it. Paper. Where can I find paper? Luck must have been with me that day because on the ground lay a piece of parchment paper not used. I settled myself down under a tree and dipped the eagle feather in the berries. As soon as the feather touched the paper, a smooth red ink appeared. It works, I shouted, and began to write the letter from Cosette, Louis D'Angelo. I'm assuming that line there is the paper. I mean, there's the eagle feather. Her outfit looks really good for having, been traveling for so long. Pretty impressive. Oh! This is a long one. I really appreciate you all holding in there if you haven't stopped already. But I mean, we have to know how it ends, right? Chapter 5, Cosette at your service. I was careful of what I wrote. I didn't want it to sound too odd. After about 15 minutes, I came up with a serious and not so serious letter, sort of leaving out the stuff about Louisa. This is what my brilliant mind came up with. Dear Ulysses, as you know, I'm dying in Washington Hospital. If I die, you can have my cat, Louisa. If you want to see me before I meet the hands of death, send me a telegram soon. From Louis D'Angelo, submaker. Doesn't say that, but we know. You may think it's mean to call Louisa a cat, but she may look like one for real. The letter likely had nothing to do with the real one, but how was I supposed to remember the first letter? I got back to Gettysburg and the shack. Now, how can a brilliant mind find out how to get in there without getting killed? Well, I'm telling you, this was my lucky day because the door swung open and an old lady came out. She looked about 60 or so. Are you the new maid? She asked. Me? I gulped. Yes, I'm the maid, I said boldly, as if I just won a medal or something. I did not read that very well. Yes, I'm the maid, I said boldly, as if I just won a medal or something. The lady looked puzzled. According to this record, your name is Eponine Mallet. She paused to straighten her thoughts. I am the old maid Clara. My sister is having a baby in Trenton, and I'll be gone for just a few days. Clara threw on her shawl and scurried away to the waiting carriage. I was left alone. I had no one to show me where to sleep or anything, so I wandered into the dingy shack and looked around. Just then a tall, skinny man put his foot down where I leaned down to pick up a quill which had just fallen. Hello, young lady. What are you doing in my house? His voice was stern and had no flair in it at all, unlike Clara's cheerful voice. I lifted my head so I could see his stern face. I'm your new maid, I started to say. He interrupted me. Well then, clean, he said. Chapter 6, Operation Jello. I knew he meant business, so I picked up the nearest feather duster and dusted. I dusted it until my arm felt like a brick. I had a feeling this man was Grant, and soon I would give him the darn letter. At 5 o'clock, I was called to make dinner. I was glad that I got to make dessert. Jello surprise! A perfect place to hide the letter. I carefully placed the mix in a big mixing bowl. I picked up the box and read the directions. It read, add 2.5 cups of water, then add fruit, and surprise. I took caution when pouring the water in the bowl. I zipped over to the cupboard and grabbed the cup of raspberries. From there, I threw them in the bowl. The cook thought I was nuts. Next, I placed the surprise in the mold. Then I poured the mix into the mold. I placed a plate under it and shoved it in the icebox. Soon it was time for dessert. I proudly served the Jello. Right before he put his spoon in the red Jello, the doorbell rang, and I rushed to get it. I swung the door open to see a frail figure of about 10 or 11 at the door. She lifted her bright hazel eyes and replied, and said, I'm Eponine Mallet, the new maid. Mr. Grant wanted. I smiled in a cunning way. She was right on time. Just then, an uproar began in the dining room. What is this letter doing in my food? Grant roared. Eponine looked at me and then at Grant, who was storming down the hall. I grabbed my coat off the coat tree. Nice to meet you, Eponine, I greeted her as I darted out the door. Maybe we'll have tea sometime. I yelled from a distance and then ran off. I ran away so fast I almost flew. I stopped under an oak tree to catch my breath. I curled up into a small ball and slowly fell asleep. There is a picture of the Jello surprise. Looks more orange Jello to me, but letter is holding up pretty well in Jello, I gotta say. Chapter 7, Not You Again. When I woke up, I saw a piece of paper blowing towards me. It was a piece of white, worn-out paper, ripped and torn. Then I saw Grant written on it. I took a close look at it. It was the real letter. I looked at it and started to cry. After all I'd been through, the letter was still in one piece. Heaven knows I wasn't. I took the paper and tore it into shreds. A wagon full of wounded soldiers stopped in front of me. The man looked at me, my red eyes, dirty face, and my ripped dress. He smiled. Need a lift? I'm on my way to Washington Hospital. I was bewildered. I shook my head with rage. Do I ever, I cried, and hopped in the wagon, and we rode off. I'm rage. I'm shaking my head. Rage. There's the original letter. Apparently. Looks good to me. Oh, Chapter 8. God, I hope this is less than 30 minutes. You guys are troopers. Chapter 8, A Long-Lost Friend. The wagon halted in front of the hospital. I hopped out and thanked him for the ride. This time, when I walked into room 211, I crossed my fingers. I opened the door. Cosette! It was Jean Valjean. It was my dad. I ran to him with open arms. Daddy, I cried gleefully. I missed you so much. He looked at me. What did you do while I was gone? I laughed. Ha! You don't want to know. Besides, I can't tell you. Dad looked upset, but then he grinned. Will you tell it to him? Daddy held up a little kitten. I stood in amazement. You bet, I cried, and I held the little ball of fluff. I knew right away what to call him. I'll call him Mr. Fluff. That's his name. Great name, my dad exclaimed. We hugged. 6 months later, we were all fine, and the war was finally over. On a lazy, sleepy Saturday afternoon, a package arrived for me and my family. I opened the pinkish box and read a card on which a set of keys were attached. The card read, To Cosette, a friend when I needed one, Your dream house. Friends know things like that. I read the engraving on the keys. 19 Crossbrook Lane, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Yes, I lived at 19 Crossbrook Lane, and I lived in New Jersey. I knew Abe had sent them, and I felt guilty that he spent all that money on me. When we reached the house, it was wonderful, just like I'd imagined. Blue, with black shutters, with a rose garden in front. I ran up to my room. A canopy bed! I opened the closet, which contained a whole wardrobe of calico dresses and a drawer full of ribbons, every color of the rainbow. A small door led into a big bathroom with a large bathtub and a sink. Another door led into a room with tons and tons of books. In the corner of my room, a window displayed our backyard with a set of swings. A lake had been cleaned and had little ladders on every side. The kitchen had a stove, sink, icebox, and a large table. I ran around the house, up and down. It was wonderful. Even a small phonograph in my mother's room. It was a dream house, a dream come true. So there's the house, and there's Mr. Fluff, the cat. In retrospect, I should have hired someone else to do the illustrations. They are, they just don't match the caliber of the novel. Here you go. It's the last chapter. Chapter 9. One gained, one lost. I hummed and skipped as I went to school. I was wearing one of the calico dresses in my big closet. I had 2 pretty bows in my hair. In my hand was a set of new reading, mathematic, and spelling books found in my mini library. I took a nickel out of my pocket and ran into Smith's General Store. The clerk, Mr. Smith, was reading a newspaper while I was picking out a type of candy I wanted for my lunch. When I paid for it, he dropped the paper. I took a glimpse at the headline. It read, Abraham Lincoln, shot last night by John Wilkes Booth. Tears flooded my eyes. I ran out of the store, forgetting my bag of gumdrops. I threw my books on the ground and screamed and yelled, No, not Abe, I loved him so much. I started to sound like a hyena with a horse. I ran to my thinking spot near the brook. Once I was there, I cried uncontrollably. I coughed and gasped. Then I stopped and thought about my dad. It could have been him, and that made me feel worse. I started to hallucinate. I saw a figure of Abe, and he started saying, Cosette, don't cry, I'm sorry. Why are you sorry? John's the one who shot you, not yourself. He patted me on the shoulder. I'll miss you, Cosette. I think I loved you as much as you loved me. Goodbye. I bet I looked silly waving to no one if anyone saw me. I thought about what my hallucination said. I did love him. I'll miss him. A lot. One word. A lot. And here is Cosette crying, throwing her school books. She's so sad. And that's it. That's the beautiful story of Cosette, the story of a little Yankee. I hope you enjoyed it, and I didn't hit the 30-minute mark.